My name is John Monroe. I'm a long-term resident of Japan, having lived most of my life here now, the majority of my years here in Japan. I've been a long time meditator. I began meditating in 1977 and have experienced in a whole number of different practices, particularly from various Buddhist traditions. I had a series of teachers, some spanning a decade or more, and have steeped myself in these various meditative practices. And I'm approaching it from a viewpoint, rather than a religious viewpoint, more of a spiritual or transcendent viewpoint. But in the process of doing that, I've also found that there are many techniques that could be applied to general wellness for anybody who chooses to focus on them. These are natural abilities that any person can develop if they put their mind to it. And I kind of base my authority for sharing this information on comments that the Dalai Lama has made at various times to psychologist Daniel Goleman, that any techniques that are found within various Buddhist traditions that might be helpful to people outside of those traditions should be shared in ways that are helpful and not harmful. So a good example of this is the MBSR and MBI, mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based interventions in medicine. These are applications of Burmese meditative techniques that have been developed over the last 2 centuries or so. And they've been applied in a narrow range to help people feel better and to function better without the Buddhist or religious container in which they were delivered to us. So one of the issues with the mindfulness, as it's called, mindfulness-based practices, is that it can trigger what's called the progress of insight, which is a series of experiences that one goes through, particularly once one gains the kind of facility that would bring the outcomes that mindfulness-based practices seek, which are better functioning, more clarity of mind, healthier, more wholesome modes of being, etc. The progress of insight does lead to those, and then it carries on from there into more challenging states, which are often referred to as the states of suffering, the suffering knowledges, dukkha jnanas, or the dark night stages, as they're sometimes called. So to ameliorate this, or to avoid it altogether, there's a whole other body of practices in the Buddhist tradition called the Brahma Viharas, which are divine abidings, or the 4 immeasurables they're called in the Mahayana tradition. I'm calling them beautiful minds, because that's basically what they are. That's how I experience them. And there are 4 of these, and I think they're particularly helpful in balancing the sometimes dry and deconstructive nature of mindfulness practice when it's taken beyond sort of casual interest. So these beautiful minds, the Brahma Viharas are called metta, which is loving kindness, or what I'm calling caring. Then there's compassion, karuna. I'm calling that one helping. Then there's sympathetic joy, or mudita. I'm calling that one celebrating, because it's about celebrating the achievements of oneself and others, the successes of oneself and others. And then finally there's equanimity, or upekkha, upeksha in the Sanskrit, which is a practice, a kind of culmination of the practice where the mind gets balanced. I'm calling that one equipoise, or stillness. Could be resting also. So it's when the mind comes to the kind of equilibrium where there's no more picking and choosing, no more trying to make things other than they are. And that's an excellent state of mind. all four of these are sort of applied at first and then naturally arise appropriate to the situation. So in a base state, in your sort of default mode, there would be this caring, basically caring for oneself and others. If there's any difficulty, somebody's experiencing difficulty, then that would give rise to compassion or the helping mode. When things are going well for others, rather than having sort of envy or how come they get all the luck, instead there would be this joy, this celebration that, oh, your happiness is my happiness, your success is my success. And then finally it all comes back to rest in the state of equipoise or resting, stillness of mind, that is the opposite of not caring. In fact, it's seeing the unique equalness of all phenomena. That a toothache and a piece of chocolate are each interesting in their own way. And since that is what is happening right now, if it is, then to embrace and accept that in an open and loving way. So this and other protocols for wellness that spring out of meditative practices that I've worked on for decades, and many others as well. These can be applied in very straightforward ways so that somebody could benefit from their application without any knowledge or necessarily interest in the cultural or religious underpinnings of those practices. So that's kind of a summary of what I'm doing in this course. I was very fortunate to meet Professor Garrett in my return to studying at the University of Toronto. I began my undergrad degree after returning to Canada from 10 years of travel, after dropping out from high school. So I've been a student at the University of Toronto twice. I started once at the age of 28 or 29 back in the 80s. And then now I came back in 2019 to finish my degree. I actually left the university to study Tibetan Buddhism with a teacher that I continue to consider my main teacher, even though he passed away in 2003, Namjo Rinpoche. And then when it came time to return to finish my degree remotely from Japan, the only course available to me was a course in translating Tibetan Buddhism into English from Tibetan with Professor Garrett. And then her work with the various student flourishing course material areas that she's worked on, in the interim. That has sort of paralleled my own journey very much. How to take these beautiful practices and apply them in ways that are non-harming, that reflect agency in oneself as opposed to relying on some outside authority, reclaiming our own bodies and minds, and becoming free of all kinds of oppression and exploitation or extractive models that otherwise might control what we do. So that's a bit of a summary of what I'm doing.